Hey, everybody. I'm Dr. Larry Kuhn, and I am so happy that you're here to join us today. This is the seventh in a series of virtual events, 30-minute virtual events that we've been sponsoring twice a month. It's called Viewpoint Operational Psychology. We're glad that you're here, and we're really excited about today and what's going to happen today. Finally, this presentation will also be made available probably by the end of the day or tomorrow on our website, AspireVue.com, and you can see this and other presentations and download them, watch them when you'd like to. One of the things that I'm really excited about today as we get into this topic is to recognize that we have the opportunity for great synergy to come together when people of different generations are meeting together in the workplace. And we also have the opportunity for lots of challenges. Never before have we had four generations that are so different in the workplace. Not only that, we have a new generation always coming on, and particularly one that we're right in the middle of right now is the agentic organization, AI. Agentic organizations are needing to orchestrate and align teams around shared contexts and outcomes, currently identifying the right mix of human and AI. It really increases the challenge of building trust between people and even agentic agents like AI. It's a huge thing to have to navigate. So today we're focusing on the human side of change specifically. The speed of information flow is fueling constant change, and that makes connecting with others feel like we're just trying to catch a moving train. How do we catch that train? If we're left behind, there will be disconnects, miscommunications, and conflict. We need imagination, insight, clarity on one side, and strategies and tactics on the other. Today, the purpose of our semi-monthly meeting today in this virtual event is to provide tools that inform and inspire leaders. Everyone has ideas, but transformation doesn't happen without leaders. And that's why we have several with us today. So I'd like to introduce our panel members. These are transformational leaders. Addie Smith is an entrepreneur, consultant, mentor coach, and she brings a great deal of expertise. She'll be speaking to us in just a moment, but she has a lot of experience navigating generational dynamics in today's workplace with hands-on experience working alongside boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. She has seen firsthand really how differing values, priorities, and communication styles can either spark tension or unlock collaboration. Throughout her career, Addie has helped leaders and creative teams bridge generational divides by focusing on empathy, clear communication, and aligning strengths across age groups. She has some practical strategies that she'll share in just a moment to turn what feels like friction into opportunities for stronger team culture and shared performance. But first, let's hear from our first presenter, and that's Jade Fountain. We'll have an opportunity to dialogue all together near the end, but Jade is a skilled connector. She's a collaborator and project manager who leads operations with an organization called Generational Performance Solutions. It's a business strategy firm that is dedicated to helping organizations navigate generational dynamics through training, workforce planning, and programming. Welcome, Jade.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Glad you could be here. You know, one of the things, Jade, that I saw recently is that your organization has released a book, and it's called Generational Advantage: How to Lead, Communicate, and Drive Performance Across the Generations. Tell us a little bit about what your concept is, first of all, and how does that help organizations navigate general dynamics?
Yeah, so thanks for mentioning the book. We are, I think, 3 weeks into having been officially published, and Camber, our founder and CEO, is just thrilled to have the product and the project out into the world. The Generational Advantage as a book focuses on our 7-part talent impact process. And it really takes the reader through each step of that process. And what that is a framework that helps organizations to evaluate how well they're performing across the employee life cycle. So, attraction, onboarding, development, retention, communication, and culture. And the book and the process is built to help leaders see where generational dynamics are creating friction, where they're creating opportunity, and how to leverage those for progress, productivity, profit, all of those things that we all want to see in our organizations. So the book itself really gives a roadmap for how to improve all of these intergenerational engagement pieces of the puzzle, from job description through leadership development and beyond.
So there's 7 parts. Which part for you really stands out personally? I mean, and why does that resonate with you? I mean, you're working there, so it must mean something to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a long career prior to coming to GPS, and I've seen all of these parts at play. Probably the two that stand out to me the most are communication and expectations. That's one. And then retention and activation is the other. Communication, because it is the heartbeat of every team. It's also where most generational conflict is going to start. We see it again and again and again, that it's not that generations don't want the same outcomes in the workplace. It's just that they don't know how to communicate that, and they also prioritize it differently. So communication, the retention and the activation piece, on the other hand, that's where you see those differences turn into results or lack of results. And so those two pieces are really, for me, the bread and butter of where we sit in the work that we do.
Okay. So if I was, well, I'm going to ask you basically summarize what would be some of the key takeaways that by the time that we're done today that you would want people to know that are here listening that they could put into practice within today or tomorrow?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest takeaway is that generational intelligence is a leadership skill. It's not something that you can just like you read the book and I'm good to go. It is a leadership skill. So when leaders take the time to understand why people think and work the way that they do, they can leverage those differences instead of trying to erase them, suppress them, pretend they don't exist. For leaders and managers who are in the room today, if you had a tool that you knew would be a game changer for your team and how you relate to one another, my question is, wouldn't you use it? And so for me, generational intelligence is that tool, and that's the big takeaway, I hope, from our conversation today.
So you've had, through your work in the organization, an opportunity, I think, it sounds like, to interact with a number of different companies as consultants,
Mm-hmm.
and really turning concepts into practice. Can you think of an example or an experience that you've seen that kind of captures what you're going after in that consulting role?
Absolutely. So we have the privilege of working across a lot of different industries. I would say our biggest industries are AEC, finance, healthcare. But I will offer just a small snapshot, goodness, of a company that we worked with, a law firm. They were facing a challenge in retention. And that's often where our engagement begins, is someone is noticing there's a challenge somewhere. Often it is retention. And for this law firm, probably unsurprising, it was in first-year associate retention. So what we did is we implemented an engagement survey. We reviewed that data and pinpointed 2 major issues. They were unclear growth paths and an absence of an effective mentorship program. I'm going to summarize all of this just to get to the point here, which was, once we worked with them, we implemented a very structured onboarding process, paired that with a robust mentorship program. And I would say the results speak for themselves. They saw a 40% improvement in their retention within just 1 year. And I just want to lay it out on the table that you might, if you're on this call with us, you might be thinking, gosh, that sounds so simple, so easy. And it's not rocket science, but I think that the critical piece is that it's attention. It's paying attention to the data. Data happens to be our seventh spoke of the wheel, by the way. But it's paying attention to the data and getting really curious about what your team needs and responding to that.
So I know that when you think about generations, some generations are very adept at technology. They're adopting AI very regularly. They're more at ease with it. Others, not so much.
Sure.
And so for certain generations, social media is a huge part of how they are sharing information. They may not trust institutions to share information, so they rely on others in using social media to very quickly process information much more faster than what we might have normally done, leaving a voicemail message or sending an email. So I'm just wondering what that does. I mean, it seems like that's a huge challenge when you're looking at communication as one of the main things that are facilitating understanding.
So there's a lot of pieces to this that I think we can address. So the first piece that I will address is how the different generations communicate. And your chart at the very beginning was a really good start for that. What we tell teams basically is each generation in general, and this is painting with a broad brushstroke, right? We understand that people are individuals and it's going to be so different. It can be so different from person to person, but generally speaking, generations like to communicate in specific ways. A baby boomer, for example, might prefer a phone call or a face-to-face, whereas, you are more likely to get a millennial perhaps via email. The key to this is understanding how your team likes to communicate. We do this for our team internally, and we recommend this to everybody, is really get with your team and understand, how do you like to communicate? What is your preferred method? And that's not to say, Larry, that you have a 20-person team and you're going to email half of them and text the other half. And that's not what we're advocating for. That's crazy making. What we are advocating for is in the instances where it really matters, it's really urgent, specifically urgency, right? Know how your team wants to communicate and do that. You're going to get a response so much better, and it's just going to be better for communication in general. The other piece that I'll address, you mentioned social media. So in our early work as GPS, we did our own research, we did meta-analysis, and you noted this, younger generations, at the time it was millennials, but this is also true of Gen Z, they leverage social media in ways that no other generation currently does or probably will in the future, in particular with job searches. So millennials, Gen Z, they're going to a company's social media page most likely before they go to a company's website. And what they want to see on that social media, they're asking themselves, does this company's values align with who I am? Does it align with my values? And the way they're looking for these values is on social media. So we do some work with smaller companies on their social media. We've done this, particularly I'm thinking of a medical training school. And we've seen this be a bridge between generations. The Gen Xers and the baby boomers on this particular team have really bought into the idea of storytelling on the social media platforms, and they're excelling in recruitment because of it. They get that to recruit new students, they've got to tell the story. They've got to show who they are. And it's showing up in really remarkable ways, not just in recruiting for them, for their students, but they're building connections with alumni, and they're building connections with partner organizations who now actively seek them out to not only come and present to their students, but to actively recruit their students, because they're saying, hey, this school's values align with what we're doing as a company. So I would just say, blanket statement on this one, when organizations use social media intentionally, highlighting growth, highlighting community and purpose, they're going to recruit well, but they're going to connect well across generations.
So, as I read through the book and listening to you talk, there were a couple of things that kind of jumped out to me. One was that communication is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the areas where a misconnect can happen. And what I've found also in discussions with a lot of people is that where they get their information is certainly informing what they believe, and that communication piece is really shaping their reality. And so we have the potential for what people have talked about, having these echo chambers where you basically, it's a very different world that a person who is me as a late boomer and maybe a very early Gen X, I don't know, depending on where you draw the line, that my reality is informing my beliefs very much by the channels of communication that I'm having.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece. The second thing that really jumped out to me was that there are common needs across each one of these generations, and we're all kind of trying to get to the same place, truthfully. But often what happens is these polarities begin to emerge that seem to divide us. And the more it seems that there's a focus on the uniqueness of these different categories within these groups, the more that kind of partitions, and rather than bringing together.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I got out of the book, the fundamental for me was that the bridging piece was connecting to something outside of my own perspective and belief that's looking for the common thread between everyone. That just seemed to jump out for me. Is that what you're trying to communicate through the book as well?
It is. It is. I think often when people approach us and they don't know a lot about us as a company, they want to say, can you tell us how these generations are different? Are you going to talk to us about how the generations are different? And there's some of that, right? Because each generation has a distinct way they like to communicate, a distinct way that they are motivated. There are distinctions. What we try to focus on more than anything is where there's overlap and where these can kind of all work together, again, for progress and productivity. At the end of the day, that's what we all want. We all want to feel effective in our work and valued in our work. And in joining these generations together and helping each cohort to understand the value in the other, that's what our aim is to inform collaboration and build from that.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So what would basically be one mindset shift if we think of mindset as a collection of beliefs, attitudes, experiences, history? I read a statistic recently, I think it was actually in your book, that a survey that showed that of Gen Z people in the last month, only about 1 out of 5 have had a conversation with a boomer. It's just like there's not a lot of cross-pollination.
Mm-hmm.
And that does basically say there's a very significant mindset difference. And we're really here all about thinking of ways that we can bridge gaps.
Yes.
Rather building bridges rather than separating. So I'm just wondering what's a good idea for a mindset shift that would help someone, because I'm very entrenched, and it's really easy for me to take a look at an experience that might just happen in a moment, on a snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
The person is going in, and then the first place that I go is very judgmental and dismissive, and I own that because I'm frustrated in the moment. So then that mindset gets reinforced. And now the next time I have another one, if I'm walking into Lowe's and I see someone, I'm probably not going to look to the younger generation to direct me where I can find that bolt that I need. I'm going to look to the older guy who is there. And so there it goes. Here I go. And I begin to stereotype.
Sure. So from a mindset shift perspective, I'm a big fan of the framework of start or stop, start, continue.
Okay.
We use this in our work. So for mindset set shifting, it's a tongue twister, Larry. Stop assuming that differences equal conflict. Generational differences aren't problems to solve. It's information. That's all it is. It's just
Okay.
it's input and output, right? And with your output, start getting curious, ask questions. And this isn't just leadership to the younger generation. This can be younger generation to leaders. Ask questions. What shaped your expectation? What does success look like? Curiosity is such a key to this work. Be curious. It's going to build empathy. Empathy builds better collaboration. And then continue to focus on shared goals. So every generation, as I just said, in the workplace, they want to contribute, they want to grow, they want to feel valued. If leaders anchor the conversation around purpose instead of like, I prefer it if you do it this way, I prefer this, friction is going to end. If you friction will abate. It won't completely end, but it will start to turn into forward motion if you approach it with curiosity and focus on shared goals.
All right. So as a manager, now this not only happens in the workplace, but also in families,
Yes.
that you'll have people that are stuck really kind of being forced to have to deal with people that are very different from them, and they feel like they're stuck in the middle. Sometimes it's easy for the polarities to go one way and the other way, and here you are in the middle as a manager trying to get things done through people. And we need skills and we need tools. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned one there, like identifying a common purpose, and
Yeah.
that's something that kind of pulls us all together. Maybe there's some pitfalls that I should avoid as a manager that ends up dividing and causing mistrust rather than building trust? I mean, what are you seeing?
So pitfalls, everyone's guilty of unconscious bias. There's just, you can be aware of it, you can have self-awareness, you can sort of practice that. Um, Unconscious bias will always exist. If you check it before you open your mouth, that's always a good that's always a good start, right? But I think for managers who feel stuck in the middle, and I'll say even for family members who feel stuck in the middle. I've got two young children. They're Gen Alpha, and we all need to buckle up when Gen Alpha gets into the workplace. But we'll save that for a later day. I think starting small and leading with transparency. One of my favorite people in the whole world is Brene Brown, and Brene Brown says, "Clear is kind." And I think that if you can be clear, if you can be transparent, that will go a long way. Assumptions are going to lead to problems. We all know that. One of my favorite takeaways from our work, I always like to call it out. Camber says it all the time. Common sense is no longer common. And what I want to say is we don't make that as some sort of statement about any one generation. I think I can say that, and you're probably thinking, oh, yeah, Gen Z, unconscious bias right there. But I will say, the global pandemic, and yes, we're still talking about this, it's 5 years later, it really turned our workforce, our workplaces on its heads. And we're still at the point where we're reframing what work looks like even 5 years later. And so I think you shouldn't assume that when you say 8 o'clock, that people know you mean 7:55, if that's what you mean. If that's what you mean, say it. Don't assume that your new hires know what your workplace norms are. Don't assume that your intern knows what success looks like. Set the bar, show, tell, be clear. And that, I think, will really help when you're feeling stuck. Is just be abundantly clear. Overstate. I think there's no such thing as over communication in what we're doing today.
That's excellent advice. Thank you, Jade. We'll bring you back in when we're all talking together. And I do invite people, as a reminder, go over to the Q&A if you have a comment or a question, and we'll field those. Now I'd like to shift. Thank you, Jade. I'd like to shift to Addie. Addie Smith is an entrepreneur, an architectural lighting designer, and a mentor. She's invited several people in her sphere of influence to join us on the call today as well to watch. And she will have some thoughtful contributions, I believe, from some of her experience navigating these four generations within the workplace. So, Addie, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Addie, you work in a very creative field and you run a small business. And I know in the creative field, there can be a lot of tension when people need to weigh in with their differences, and you almost have to have a thick skin and not be too sensitive. So, I'm wondering, while you're putting on that thick skin, what generational insight or specifics have you seen be important for creatives? And what generational insights have kind of moved the needle for you within organizations instead of just having them get stuck?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to take a little bit more of an applications approach here and just give a lot of what I've seen and heard in my experience working both in other creative professional service firms and as a consultant, as well as in my own business. So, as with many creative fields, and also this kind of applies to other fields where a lot of egos are involved in creative work, people's output is often tied to their personal expression and identity. And so communication around the work can be sensitive and needs to be navigated with emotional intelligence. So as a leader, I try to create an equitable framework for dialogue and normalize feedback by trying to separate the person from their creative output, and then try to create processes, workflows, and structures to evaluate the work itself, not the people doing the work. So keeping those two separate is important for the communication and everyone's sort of feelings involved.
So separate the behavior from the person kind of thing.
Yeah, and this kind of creates rules for the road that helps everyone navigate safely and productively, so that there's less time having to focus on what you said meant this and miscommunications like that. So again, like picking up what Jade said, with communication being one of the biggest friction points, especially in creative fields, it's even more important to get that communication dialed in. So I think for the framework piece, what I try to do within my business is really prioritize getting to know each person as the principal of my firm and the team leader. First, I want to know who they are and understand their life situation, not just from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint, because that really impacts how you choose to interact with them and communicate with them. And that also means getting to know what their capabilities are with their personality, as well as their skill sets and knowledge base, and understanding where their growing edges are so that you can leverage their strengths and unique capabilities through their work. And I think that ties to the motivation and connection that they have in their work. So I really do tailor my approach to interactions with each person based on their individual needs and their availability and life situation. How I might approach a working mom and communicate an ask is going to be very different than how I would communicate with a new intern, and knowing that they just came out of the pandemic and they have had a different situation. So having that understanding as a leader is really important. And then I just, for the way that I work, I have individual agreements with the contract workers that work with me, and that goes beyond just the confidentiality and things like that. That goes into what are the soft topics that show some need for accommodations to their specific situation. And I think that's a signal to show that I care and want to be in a conversation that's open about what people's needs are. If people don't feel safe to communicate their needs in a work environment, then they're not going to speak up when you need that innovative next idea. And so creating a safe space is really important. So part of the things that I put in the agreement, have to do with agreed upon standard days that they're going to work and specific office hours that they're expected to be available to. We've talked about what clear expectations are for response times on email, response times on messaging on different platforms, and how people like to be communicated with. And I know with a small business, you can have a little bit more flexibility with these sorts of things. It gets a little bit harder as the organization expands, but it is really, really important to understand how the accommodations that you are making will impact the rest of the team's workflow and accessibility. It's critical that you're not preventing work from being done by creating these sort of preferred accommodations. So that's just as a manager, that's something to be aware of. I would say the next point is also just to really know your audience, and this could be as simple as keeping a notes file of what people like or prefer so that you can meet them where they are. And it's important to emphasize that this does take effort. This is why you're a leader and not a follower, because you are going the extra mile to actually put the work in, because you understand that in order to get things done, you have to work through people, and putting the effort in this sort of way is doing that work.
So I'm going to pause there for a second and kind of reflect. And for full disclosure, Addie's my daughter, all right? And I've had the opportunity ever since she was very young to kind of watch her as she develops the ability to connect with others uniquely and have an influence. And, I'm proud of her, of course, and seeing her do this. But I recall there's two particular things, Addie, that seem to have really influenced your own experience when you enter into this space of being an influencer within a team. And one is you have worked on teams before. And I remember seeing you play a role on teams where you had a unique relationship, like you've just described, with different members, and recognizing that, hey, if you're a pitcher, you have a whole different world than if you're, you know, a first baseman. So that's one thing, is the team. And you mentioned team a couple of times that I heard as you were talking here, to be able to get the most out of your team. The other one, I know that Addie has a very unique experience in that she's a dancer and she does swing dancing. And that piece relates as well, because there's lead and follow. And we've talked a little bit about that. It's not just a hierarchical type of thing. There is a dance that is happening between the leader and the others on the team. So I don't kind of, you talked about the audience here just now, and I just couldn't help myself without kind of bringing that out there. And I'm just wondering, how do you relate both of those? I mean, does it relate? In what way does that relate?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece of that is what I was speaking to before, is leveraging the strengths of others. And so if you know that they're good at pitching and they're good in front of clients, they're good at improvising on the fly, invite them in and foster more growth and more confidence in those specific pieces, so that they can feel ownership, even at a younger level, within the company. If it's not hierarchical, they can still feel like they're contributing an important part that is unique to them. And I think that, I'm a millennial. That's a signature, meaning and belonging kind of thing. So I'm probably giving a little bit of bias just from my own generational perspective, but I think how it relates to other generations is just knowing that whatever that person is or what they're bringing to the table is valuable and that you respect it. And that needs to be clear from day one, especially across generations. When you have a Gen Z wanting to contribute to a conversation, but if their perspective is not one of respect for all of the other people and the things that they know, that they've learned through, hard work and wisdom, then they're not going to come off like right, the types of things they're going to be contributing to might be trite. They might be missed because they're not really connecting with that mutual respect. And I think the same thing goes with the boomer generation. They need to have a healthy respect for the types of things that the younger generations offer. And that, I would say, just off the bat, the Gen Z is great at pivoting. They're great at adapting to new situations, finding new tools, new technologies, but they may not know how to apply those tools and technologies in a way that's effective for the business. And that's where creating this co-creation across generations, you can really leverage the skill set of each individual with what they have to bring to the table. And that can be better for the bottom line. That can be better for your business because you're not missing opportunities. Maybe as the boomer, you're not missing opportunities to create a different way that might connect with your audience or your client base differently, more innovatively, because you're engaging the younger generation. And I think every generation has a valuable contribution just from their own experience. So you need to create space for them to be able to contribute and talk about that, so that you can, if you don't create an opportunity to hear and to receive feedback, you can't take it and strategize. And that's part of your role as a leader, is creating a strategy where you have successful outcomes. That's critical in my opinion.
As I've been listening to you, what struck me is that there is, as a manager, as a leader, it is really about being very intentional, not to just be reactive to whatever is coming up, but to have insight into your own stuff, and then to make movements to bridge between folks. And I mean, I've had that experience where you have two very different people who get in these adversarial postures, and I'm sitting there trying to facilitate, and I'm bridging, but I need to somehow help them to bridge. And in a way, I almost have to model that for them. And that begins, for me, I've found, with authenticity, where I'm going to weigh in and not just be shining people on, but actually say, look, I want you to trust me, and I'm going to venture out here and weigh in with, here's how I experience. Can I give you some feedback right now? Here's how I experienced you when you said that. And I'm not sure that you intended for that to come across that way. So it's a very specific way of being authentic that invites authenticity. And so I'm thinking the challenge of authenticity, along with curiosity, it's not an easy thing to do, is it?
Yeah. So I think one of the other things I wanted to hit on was this idea of how do you remain authentic to who you are while still catering to the preferences and accommodating to the
Yeah.
different emotions. And I think in professional settings, code switching is a word that you probably heard thrown around a lot in different scenarios, but in a professional setting, it refers to altering your natural communication style, tone, and behavior to fit in or be accepted, often unconsciously, based on who's in the room. And so some examples of what that might look like: using overly formal language with boomers, but relaxed slang with Gen Z, hiding your authentic communication style to avoid conflict, and modifying your tone to avoid being seen as too direct or too emotional or too casual. So the challenge with this is that over time, this can be exhausting, inauthentic, and can actually worsen generational misunderstandings rather than easing them. So I would challenge leaders to create a space in their team that helps foster people not having to code switch, and to actually be able to be more of themselves, to communicate adaptively but authentically. And so there's several ways that you can look at this and go about this. One is anchoring in your core communication values. So start by defining your authentic baseline. What tones feel natural to you: direct, warm, data-driven, conversational, and what values drive how you speak: clarity, respect, empathy, efficiency. Use those as your North Star across all generations, and know that if you've defined these for yourself, that's how you know you're being authentic, if you are practicing those. So instead of morphing into different personas, you can adjust your technique, but not your identity. So an example of that is you can stay warm and collaborative, but tailor your delivery with more detail for boomers or more brevity for Gen Z.
So you hold on to authenticity on one side, but then that's the bridging, isn't it? And then on the other side, you connect with them kind of in the channel where they're at without becoming fake.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I know that I've listened as you've navigated some of these types of challenges. When you have to work with a guy that's a boomer slash, and this was the other nuance that I kind of heard that Jade was talking about, that look, not all boomers are the same. There's a lot of boomers that are not technologically adept, and there is a lot that are. So we can't, there's nuances within groups, not just between groups. So I'm just thinking, as I've listened and watched you navigate, I've heard you in certain situations where you've worked before that there's been some real challenges, like which I just thought was really interesting from my side listening to that, um, because I kind of saw you as millennial, and then there's always friction between Gen X and millennial, and then along comes Gen Z, and you had to like figure out some new ways to communicate with folks and learn some things along the way. And I'm just kind of making a comment there.
Yeah, I think what I've learned from them is that you have to create a culture where everyone clarifies expectations every time. This is just the way we communicate. So when we clarify expectations, like Jade said, just if we're different, it doesn't mean that there's a conflict. That's literally why we're clarifying expectations, so that you can identify at an early point where a conflict might or a misunderstanding might happen, and get it at the target rather than waiting until it becomes a real problem in the work. So, and you have to lead by example. You have to set the tone and model this behavior for other people. And when they see you clarifying, asking, communicating if you misunderstood something or had a feeling or emotion about something, then they can say, oh, that's how I can do it too. And that's what creates the culture in your organization.
That's excellent. Thank you. Well, let's bring Jade in, and I know that we have a couple of questions and comments. First, Jade, I'd like to just kind of, before we show the other comments, and we'll have Denise display them on the screen. Some folks have added some things and questions to address. Jade, you've heard Addie talk a little bit. What was going through your head that was resonating or different from the way that you see it?
Yeah, so I mean, I was taking notes because I just had, it's so hard sometimes to sit on the other side and go, yes, I agree with that. I want to say something. But it's good practice to hold that. What I will say, I really appreciated Addie's comment about respect and how, if you're a member of Gen Z and you're at work and you aren't holding respect for what everyone around you of different generations is offering, and vice versa. If you're a boomer, you're not really, you're kind of missing the point. And I just wanted to kind of tie it all together with what I said about curiosity. So I think that respect so often starts with curiosity and being open, because if you're not open to what someone else has to offer, whether you're Gen Z or millennial or whoever, you're missing an opportunity to really move your business forward, move your project forward, move your team forward. And I thought that was just such a great point. And I'll also just add, Claire, you mentioned, you said this when we were speaking, and you mentioned it again, about the nuances with generations. And I will say, as we have spoken over the years, generations is such a deeply personal thing. I think that when you tell someone who is maybe on the cusp, you said you might be a baby boomer or a Generation X, you're not quite sure. When you tell someone, oh, well, based on Pew Research, which is where we kind of get our cohorts from, based on this, you're a baby boomer. If they've been identifying as Gen X for all of these years, that's an affront to them. So we talk a lot about micro generations. So you might be familiar with the term Xennial or Zoomer, or Zillennial. Like, there's a lot of things at play here. I'm a millennial. I am an elder millennial. So I was born in '86, which millennials started in '81. But like, I was part of the Oregon Trail generation, right? So like, that is very much who I am. So I will just caveat everything that I've said to say, I mean, you kind of are who you identify with as much as you are what the generation on the page says.
That's excellent. Addie, any comments here on some of the things that Jade has mentioned that really resonated with you?
Yeah, I think she mentioned emotional intelligence and the curiosity piece. I think it definitely is important to not underestimate the small steps that really move things forward. I'm a details person, so to me, the details matter, and that's what help people really feel seen, heard, and a part, belonging to the organization and to the culture. So as a leader, it's up to us to do the work to create a psychologically safe space and encourage questions, encourage mutual respect, and create a place where speaking up kindly and candidly is encouraged. Because, and I would say with the younger generation, they don't necessarily, communication in real time like this is harder for them. So if you want them to feel comfortable expressing themselves, we have to teach them how to listen, rephrase, and respond with empathy. And those are real soft skills that they're not getting in their digital world, that I think that all of the older generations are really concerned about and wanted. So we have to be the ones to teach them. Like, we can't just get mad that they're not getting it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. We have a comment, thank you, Addie, that this was first for Jade, and then Addie, you may have something here. Is there data comparing successful outcomes by generational leadership, and what attributes of those successes seem to stand out? I'll look to Jade on this one, since you've got kind of more of a grasp on some of the data.
So the way that I'm reading this question leads me to say that I have not seen any strong evidence that a leader's generation alone predicts better outcomes for a business, right? what we've seen are specific leadership skills, all the things that we've talked about. Addie mentioned soft skills. I would call them maybe even future proofing skills. So, does the leader have a coaching mindset? Are they able to align their teams to purpose? Are they nurturing talent? Are they navigating change well? Those, from my experience, would be a better predictor of business outcome than a leader's generation. Now, if I read it the other way, I will say that every business that we have worked with who focus on improving their workforce with a generational strategy, they are looking to future proof their business. They are concerned about the legacy of their business. Folks like Addie who get it, who understand that each person needs to be approached. I loved what you said, Addie, about tailored approaches. Like,
Yeah.
Folks, businesses, leaders who take that approach are hands down going to be more successful in the long term than those who ignore it.
That's good. Thank you. There's another question that came up, and I'm going to kind of direct this one also to you, Jade. And then we've got another one here that's looking at the parent versus not parent type of role that we'll kind of put out for both of you. Some thoughts by leadership that social media has distorted authenticity. Like there's a whole different, almost like the virtual world, VR is out there, which is paying a lot of attention to the perceptions that others have of us rather than being able to be real and authentic, almost to the point maybe that I don't even know who I am because I'm so much leaning toward how I'm wanting others to perceive me, and the fear of failure that is there, because if someone sees me and I'm not measuring up in some way, I'm fearing judgment. I mean, it just like locks us up with, I mean, how can we even know that we're being real talking to folks? So Jade, I'll ask you here, to what extent do you think social media is really challenging this authenticity piece?
I think this is such a difficult question for a lot of reasons. I think it's a great question. I just think it's a difficult one to approach. What we have seen, what we have heard from leaders about social media is, and you hear this most often with Gen Z, is it's that instant gratification. They're so used to instant gratification, and they're also seeing peers, whether it's peers they know or peers they feel they know because of social media. You're getting the highlight reel on social media. And this goes to Addie's comment about emotional intelligence. I think you have to approach social media with a little bit of emotional intelligence on this front. But I think that more than authenticity, social media is causing sort of this expectation gap where expectations and reality are not meeting because social media has distorted what is real. You can look on social media at any time and see someone advancing so quickly through their career, or maybe they're a self-starter, an entrepreneur, and they've started their own business, and all of a sudden they're swimming in money, whatever that might actually be. And comparing that to me as maybe I'm a Gen Z and I'm entering the workforce, and gosh, I'm making not what I thought I would be making, and so when's my promotion? We get a lot of that from leaders of, Gen Z comes in 6 months, they're ready for a promotion, and that's just not reality, but that's what they are seeing. So I think that from an authenticity standpoint, that's where social media is playing a huge role. I'll also answer a question that they didn't ask, which is Addie talked about authenticity and being authentic in your work. And I will say that Gen Z, probably more than any generation before, can smell a fake in a heartbeat. They know it when you're not being real with them. And I think that goes back to showing up as yourself, showing up as a whole person and as a real person, and not trying to be something you're not.
Thank you. Here's the next question. And Addie, I'll let you kind of respond to this one. There are differences between generations, but to what extent is that exaggerated? Because it's really about stages of life. It's not really about the generations. And non-parents have very different financial and professional priorities than parents. So does a Gen Z become more like a Gen X when they have kids?
Yeah, I think that's a complicated scenario and a complicated answer because, and that goes back to what I was saying about really knowing the life situation of the people that you're working with. You know, they may be a Gen X, but if they're, you know, or well, I would say they could be a millennial, and if they're dealing with aging parents or they have, you know, Gen Z, but they have kids, like they're obviously going to have different preferences and needs, and that's where knowing their situation can help inform how you interact with them.
Yeah. Thank you. One last question. I wanted to make sure we had this one up here, and this is for both of you. This came from Elizabeth. She loved the idea of reverse mentoring. And I've experienced that, you know, Addie, with you, that we had a great conversation the other day. And I mean, you were shooting pretty straight, and I loved it. So, how do you create psychological safety for this to occur? Because you are kind of venturing out on thin ice, and it could go badly, but you got to go out there. How do you do that? I mean, there's a lot that I can learn as a boomer from Gen Z.
Yeah, I can go first and speak to that. I think you have to be communicating with your tone, your nonverbal cues, that you're open, that you're not going to jump to conclusions. You're not going to have bring your assumptions to the door to dictate how you're thinking about things. Like there's a lot of things you can do for how you show up with other people that communicates to the other person that it's a safe space to share their real opinions and thoughts. And I think the more you can interject and sort of reassure that this is sort of an equal playing field, there's open communication is encouraged, your feedback is valued, even if we don't agree. And that's one of the things that I wrote down I wanted to really point out was make folks feel heard. But even if they share what they say, you don't have to agree, or you don't have to agree to implement those sort of things right away. What matters is that they feel seen and heard, because how people feel, they will remember that, but how they, you know, what the work is or the task, they're going to forget that. But if you can always make them feel valued and seen, even if you don't agree, then that's how you, I think, create a safe space.
Excellent. Jade, what about for you? Anything to add there on that one?
We talk about reverse mentoring all the time. It is such a valuable tool for businesses. It's a great way too for those of us who know that baby boomers may be leaving our workforce, to kind of share that knowledge, share that legacy information before they, you know, head out to get on a boat and go to the Caribbean. You know, like it's a great way to make sure that your business retains some of that institutional knowledge. To create a safe space, I just finished reading, and this is not a new book, this is an old book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And to Addie's point, people just want to be heard. I think conflict is fine. It's okay to say, hey, I disagree with that point. And even as a group to say, you know what? I don't think that's right for us at this time, but thank you so much for sharing that. That is so valuable. Making it so that people aren't afraid to disagree. And I think that's a culture point, which is another spoke on our wheel. Culture is not something that you're just going to establish day one and say, here are the parameters, here's what we're doing. It's something you do every day consciously on your teams. And so reverse mentorship won't be successful if you start it tomorrow, if you've not laid the groundwork with the culture on your team to say, this is a safe space for sharing. This is a safe space for differing opinions.
Great. Well, thank you. We're at the end of our time today. I am going to make sure that anyone who has registered or who has shown that they've watched this, we'll make available to them a synopsis of what we covered today, maybe some ideas that would boil it down. And then also we'll include on that ways that you can get in touch with Addie or Jade and have further conversations. Addie and Jade, thank you so much for joining today. Time went by so fast, and I really appreciate your willingness to connect.